So, in the preface to House of the Seven Gables, um, Hawthorne describes what kind of writer he is. He is a writer of romance. What does that mean? He says, I'm not a realist writer. I'm not someone who simply tries to imitate everyday events as they happen before our eyes. I'm much more interested in the shadows and the shades, the subtleties, the mysteries of life, because my main subject matter is the human heart. And for this reason, I make choices as a writer to try to represent these areas of human existence that are difficult to represent, the interiors, we might say. So a lot of times Hawthorne's stories feel less like realistic novels, say like by someone like, I don't know, George Eliot or Charles Dickens, or although Dickens has some fantastical elements in his own fiction, of course. Um, Someone like Hemingway, to look at a more modern writer, Conrad. His novels don't read like accounts of what happens before most everybody's eyes. His novels, his tales read more like allegories or parables or almost like folk tales in some cases, because he's choosing his images not to reflect what we can see with experience with our five senses. He's choosing his images again to try to represent what cannot be seen. Here's how he describes his practice in the preface to The House of the Seven Gables. When a writer calls his work a romance, it need hardly be observed that he wishes to claim a certain latitude, both as to its fashion and material, which he would not have felt himself entitled to assume had he professed to be writing a novel. So here even Hawthorne is saying, I'm not even a novelist. I'm a romance writer. So a novel here would be a more realistic account of existence, whereas a romance is, well, what he's describing here. The latter form, the novel, the latter form of composition is presumed to aim at a very minute fidelity, not merely to the possible, but to the probable and ordinary course of man's experience. The former, a romance, the former, while, as a work of art, it must rigidly subject itself to laws, and while it sins unpardonably so far as it may swerve aside from the truth of the human heart, has fairly a right to present that truth under circumstances, to a great extent of the writer's own choosing or creation. If he think fit, also, he may so manage his atmospherical medium as to bring out or mellow the lights and deepen and enrich the shadows of the picture. He will be wise, no doubt, to make a very moderate use of the privileges here stated, and especially to mingle the marvelous rather as a slight, delicate, and evanescent flavor than as any portion of the actual substance of the dish offered to the public. He can hardly be said, however, to commit a literary crime, even if he disregard this caution. So, what Hawthorne is going for here is what we might call a middle ground between traditional realism and straight up allegory. If traditional realism is, again, an author's effort to represent the everyday world, and if allegory is an author choosing images simply to represent ideas or theology or philosophy or political ideology, then romance is in the middle, because it does indeed pay attention to the everyday world. The characters you find in The House of the Seven Gables are recognizable characters. They aren't fantastical. They don't do magical things. Nor are they simply pasteboards for ideas. They have their own idiosyncrasies. They're unique. You cannot reduce any character to any one idea. So in this way, the book is not simply an allegory, like the medieval allegory Everyman, where the main character is everyman and he's everyman, and he meets friends like hope and faith and goodness and so on and so forth. In other words, the story is simply a sort of window through which one looks at ideas. That's an allegory. That's not the case in House of the Seven Gables. Again, the characters are particular enough to be irreducible to ideas. So Hawthorne in House of the Seven Gables, he's describing recognizable people in recognizable settings. But he's very aware of those uncanny moments in life. Those moments that seem to shimmer with the supernatural in ways that we can't quite describe. Those moments we can't quite explain. Is Maul able to curse a family or not? We don't really know, but there's doubt cast on the empirical way of looking at the world. That's what romance does, and this is why in his sketch of the Custom House, at the beginning of the Scarlet Letter, Hawthorne also describes his practice as a writer, an imagery quite similar to his description here of himself as a romance writer. And in the Custom House, he says that the writer writes best in moonlight, because the moonlight shining over the everyday objects in his study, say, at midnight, everything is still there. It's solid. And you can kind of recognize that's a desk and that's a pen and those are books. But the moonlight gives everything a kind of shimmer or a kind of mystery or a kind of vagueness to where you wouldn't be all that surprised if something really weird happened, because your senses are a little disoriented. He also says in the Custom House that the writer also enjoys looking in the mirror, especially in the mirror at night, in moonlight. Because there again, you're looking in the mirror, you're seeing yourself, but you're bathed in the moonlight, and you don't quite look like yourself. You look a little bit like yourself, but a little bit not like yourself. And you're probably a little anxious, like, what is something going to come up behind me? What's that over there? So it's this sort of, he stays close to the ordinary, but kind of pulls away from it in some cases just enough as to question the validity of the ordinary and make us wonder if the extraordinary or the supernatural or the strange or the uncanny or the weird are in fact real, or in fact the most important reality right here, right now. So as you're going through House of the Seven Gables, try to pay attention to it as this particular kind of narrative, the romance, not the realist novel, not the allegory, but somewhere in between. Just as moonlight is somewhere in between brightness and darkness. Just as the mirror is somewhere in between self, here I am standing, and other, there I am as a reflection. This idea that in the thresholds, the cracks, the crevices, in the states of in-betweenness, things in life occur that we don't understand, but it is often the case that these things that occur that we don't understand are the most decisive for our existence. So be on the lookout for those moments where Hawthorne describes something that seems really strange, but doesn't really explain why it's happened, and ask yourself about the power of these moments in the shaping of narrative. And indeed, think about moments in your own life where something uncanny, strange, that you can't really explain, how those moments may have shaped you. That would be a moment, Hawthorne would say, of romance.